In a world where it seems totally normal to listen to a podcast about the Toronto Argonauts, it's the X's and Argos podcast.
Welcome to the X's and Argos podcast. Ben Grant along with JB. Another exciting week for you, and we've got a great interview to end off today's podcast episode. JB, let's get things started by talking a little bit about how the bubble seems to be the only way to handle playing sports in 2020.
If you look at the sports who have tried to bring it back, I think football faces a challenge much greater than any of the sports simply because of the size of the roster. So obviously, you know, if you have 15 guys on a basketball team and you got 45 guys on a football team, there's just that many more chances it's not going to happen. So I think it's an uphill battle for football, but looking at hockey and basketball, which look like they might be able to pull it off, and baseball, which I think is within a day or two of canceling the season, it's pretty clear that the only chance you have is to have a central location and players in a bubble.
There are just too many variables because, again, it's not like baseball is a high contact sport. You can play baseball and actually maintain social distancing for the most part with the occasional, play at any particular base.
Well, I mean, South Korea ran their baseball league perfectly fine.
Right, but they're running it in, with a different level of discipline in a different environment. And whereas trying to run anything right now in the States is a disaster. And baseball, I feel like, is the one team sport that should be the easiest in theory. But as soon as you've got teams traveling from city to city, there are just too many variables now. And as we've seen, all it takes is for one guy to get sick, and then suddenly your whole team has to be quarantined. And, who knows what's going to happen with baseball going forward now.
Yeah, this is one of the times where the CFL being small works in its favor. The fact that there are only 9 teams makes a hub city possible. And so if they can get the buy-in, I think that, putting it somewhere out west is possible, but I think there are a lot of questions still to be answered. I think that, how are they going to enforce a bubble? Are guys going to get paid for a full season? Are they going to be willing to have that level of restriction put on their life for not very much money? It's not the NFL. I mean, we're not talking about players making $10 million. Well, even the NFL, the NFL doesn't have a bubble plan, and I think that they are not poised for success. I don't think that I think football is going to run into the same problems baseball is.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised. I think that's what we're seeing. It's just that at least in America, where there are so many cases, it has to be a bubble. But I think in Canada as well, because I think, we probably got a little bit of a shorter leash on things going wrong, if it's run in Canada. And so I think you absolutely have to keep the bubble tight. You can't have cases, because I think as soon as one team has any number of cases, I think that's it. You're shut down. And obviously the owners are really scared of that potential. And, that's probably factoring into, it taking so long to get a deal, knowing that all it takes is one little slip up and the whole thing collapses, and now we lose even more money than we may have already lost, previously.
It's going to be very difficult, I think, for them to come to an agreement with the players. In the States, it was hard for them to come to an agreement, and you're talking about the leverage of billions of dollars. And the players don't have that leverage up here. The owner, you're threatening the owner with, if you don't let us play, then you won't lose $1 million. I think it's going to be very difficult for the players to get many wins in a negotiation, and therefore the players will probably just say, well, if I'm only going to be paid for 30% of the season, I'm not, why even bother? I'm not going to roll the dice for $25,000.
And Rob Peterson was talking on his show yesterday about something that we've talked about before too, which is that there are probably a number of teams who would much rather not have a season at this point than have a season. And that seems to be the divide between the privately owned teams and the publicly owned teams, where the privately owned teams are like, let's shut things down, save what we can. And that's, I don't know what level of truth there is to all of that. I think that's a lot of speculation, but you could see why, from a business point of view, at this point, you might just want to say, let's can this thing and start next year.
I'm sure half the league feels that way. I think the fact that they don't have a plan yet certainly suggests that the owner side is not anxious.
I don't know if I can figure out exactly why there seem to be conflicting reports in terms of how close everyone is to a deal. So everything that we've heard where reporters seem to have team sources make it sound like we're very close to a deal, and yet the players and union player reps have been saying, look, we're nowhere close to a deal. Like I want to read you a couple of tweets from Farhan Louji from TSN that he tweeted out a couple of days ago. He said, with growing optimism that CFL and PA are closing in on an amended CBA, football operations staff are being informed and beginning to prepare for a possible 2020 season. This from one team's internal communications. September 14, players will begin traveling to Winnipeg. You will have to pass a COVID test twice over a 6-day period to be allowed into the bubble. After the 6-day quarantine in Winnipeg, training camp will start. That sounds like a very positive tweet. But then, moments later, players are tweeting, this is not close. What do you make of that?
Yeah, I think he has an ownership source that, that's the nature of modern sports. Ownership often will use sports media to put out test bubbles or to try and create a narrative. And, that's the nature of access for reporters. They will often put that out there. That's what it seems like. It seems like ownership is trying to put out a narrative of optimism when in fact they have not, sat down and talked to labor, which is, not a dynamic I'm not experienced with.
It's interesting that, well, I guess you do see it sometimes from a player's side, but it's usually the agents, when they're, working through the media with contract negotiations or something like that. But it's interesting that the players are coming out right away. And what I can't help but wonder is if this is owners maybe trying to get the public more on their side, maybe knowing that, if things get canceled, the public is gonna hold us responsible because they see how much support the players have. Because it does seem to be a very player-friendly situation right now in Canada where people are sympathizing because they know these guys don't make a lot of money and they recognize that this is a pretty big sacrifice here. And, maybe this is the owners just trying to make it seem like on their end things are going well.
I think the owners would love to cancel the season. I bet that the one thing that they're holding out for is the potential of being a staple on ESPN. If you look at the play the WNBA is getting now on ESPN in terms of televised games, there's going to be a vacuum of professional sports, especially of football. And, there's no doubt that the CFL owners have talked about potentially being the only football game in town. So I do think that they are a little conflicted. I do think that potential windfall intrigues them.
Yeah, and of course you don't know what the NCAA situation is like. That seems to be falling apart very quickly. if the NFL plan goes south with all the travel that's involved, imagine that. Imagine the CFL being the only football.
Yeah, I think that's a real possibility. But, what will they agree to? I mean, players are only going to play if their contracts are guaranteed on the first day of camp. Nobody's going to go fly to Winnipeg, and get paid 10% of their contract if the season is canceled. So, there's a lot of economic negotiating that the owners have to do, and I think it's going to be difficult to get people to compromise when you're not talking about tens or hundreds of millions of dollars as leverage.
There have been a lot of people on social media suggesting that this season CFL teams play just with Canadians, have exclusively Canadian rosters, call up players that are undrafted from that, would have graduated last year or run out of U Sports eligibility last year to fill out their rosters. And while I don't think that's first of all, I don't think that's possible. I don't think it's going to happen.
I mean, that sounds like an idea I would come up with. I love it.
I don't think it can happen, and I don't think I want that to happen. But it's interesting, and just because it kind of got me thinking, I started going through the Argos roster, making an all Canadian depth chart, and we're actually in a pretty good situation. Because when I was looking at the other teams, there's no question, and this is something that doesn't really get talked about too much, but the Argos have the best Canadian roster in the CFL right now. Like if you go through, I'll go quickly through this depth chart that I drew up, and you'll notice that like our offense is largely unchanged, and the defense you kind of have to move some guys around a little bit, but it's okay. We start running into trouble when, if there were any injuries or anything like that, then there are going to be issues. But it's not bad. And I think one of those reasons is because we've got Michael O'Connor at quarterback, and there just aren't a lot of good Canadian quarterbacks on CFL rosters right now. One of the cool things is it would force teams to actually find and play Canadian quarterbacks because they're there. They're just not getting the opportunities. And, to have a season seeing what Michael O'Connor could do when he's, probably the best Canadian quarterback currently on a CFL roster, I think that's, that would be kind of interesting. But there are some areas where we're a little short. Any guesses?
Potentially the defensive backfield?
That's one of the three areas where we're a little bit light. We're light at running back. We've got fullbacks. We've got Cross and Sibasu, and I think we probably need Cross to play some running back because otherwise it's really just Dion Pellerin, our 2020 draft pick at running back. And so the backfield is a little light, but the receiving core is quite good. You've still you got Brescacin and Ajay Brissett all automatically out there, which is three really nice targets for O'Connor to throw to. And then it's probably Gittins Jr. Out wide, and Levi Noel in a battle with Sam Baker for that inside slot position. But that's a really nice receiving core in terms of guys that O'Connor will be throwing to. And our offensive line is basically the same. We're short of left tackle, but there are a few guys that could fill in there. So you've got, Starchala would play center, Blake and Bladek are your guards, Jamal Campbell, right tackle. And then you've got either Richards or Simba, Churchill and Giffen, the two draft picks. Any one of those guys steps up and becomes a tackle, then you've got a really nice offensive line. So now that's probably the strongest positional group of everybody's team. But I love our all-Canadian offensive line. I think they could take on just about anybody. I would put those guys out there right now because that's four of those guys probably are going to be out there this season either way. So I think that's kind of cool.
Yeah, I think a Canadian-only league is highly possible. I don't know how else they bring all the American players up. It's not like baseball where they have the money to send a plane. I mean, are these people all going to be flying commercial? Who is running the test? I mean, I think financially, the logistics of getting all the players into Canada is very complicated. So I'm surprised it hasn't been floated, because I think it's going to be very hard for them to get all the American players into Canada.
The reason it doesn't work ultimately, and it would fall apart very quickly, is that every team would need to more than double their current roster.
Yeah, it's a lot. It's a lot of new players.
Yeah, you need to get 30 Canadians who aren't currently employed in football to suddenly be playing professional football for not very much money.
But think of the camp.
I know, the camp would be amazing.
It'd be like, Invincible. It'd be right out of a movie.
Yeah.
Think of the Disney film rights of random gym teachers showing up to become a CFLer.
Yeah, it's interesting, but again, like these people that are eligible, you're talking about recent U Sports grads who weren't drafted or who were drafted and subsequently cut. They've got jobs now, right? And while the dreams may still be there, you'd be asking them to give up their job or whatever they worked for, and in an economy where it's not necessarily easy to get it again. What if the league falls apart in 2 weeks and things aren't going to happen? Then are you going to be able to get your job back, the one that you were previously in? It's just too difficult. It's a fun idea to think about, and I had a lot of fun going through this depth chart, and I love that the Argos would actually suddenly be Grey Cup favorites, but I just, there's no way it's going to happen. But it was a neat idea, and I just thought it was kind of fun to play around with a little bit.
Yeah, I love it. Love outside the box ideas.
I'd like to welcome to the show now Toronto Argonauts Director of Canadian Scouting, Vince Magri. Thanks so much for joining us today and agreeing to talk some football.
No problem. Anytime.
So I got to know, how many Argos over the years, Argos players have done spit takes or double takes when they found out that you were a vicious, hulking 300-pound offensive lineman?
I wouldn't say hulking, but pretty much everybody.
It's remarkable. Like you look at you now and you look like a halfback.
Yeah, people try to, sometimes they ask, what position did you play? And they assume, linebacker or something else. But yeah, it was a long journey, but, in total, I think I lost 115 pounds at the height of it.
That's pretty amazing. I actually remember watching you play pretty well. My wife was a Marauder, won a national tennis championship there. So I think of the school very fondly. But I had a bunch of players that would have lined up beside you, overlapped with you a little bit. Brian Dowd, Sean Fahey, Gower, Lippert, Aaron Clark, a bunch of guys.
The Mississauga connection.
Yeah, that's, coaching at Lorne Park and in around that area. We fed McMaster pretty well over the years, but yeah, I remember watching you play pretty well. You were a good player, but what is I
appreciate that.
What's the scouting report? If you were to self-assess now, look at a senior Vince Magri, center guard, what do you have to say about that player?
Undersized and unathletic.
You're being too humble. You were a very good player, but is there anything you'd go back and maybe tell the freshman version of you?
That's a good question. For me, it would probably just be, just keep trying to increase my foot speed more than anything. I know I had physical limitations. I know I had some athletic limitations. So, I always worked extra hard on making sure, technically I was there, preparation wise, made sure I was there, put the time in the film and studying the opponent and, all the little stuff that kind of carried into what I do now. And also playing with a bit of an edge just to try to make up for some of that stuff. Did
you learn to long snap?
I could do it. I just wasn't athletic enough to cover.
Right.
So I could do I could do the short snapping, the field goal stuff. I could deep snap on a punt, but I was never I did it in high school, but never in college.
So your job title is a little bit misleading because you scout pretty much any football game that's on. But would it be fair to say that the best performance evaluation for you is the CFL draft every year?
Yeah, that's still my primary role, and kind of the I don't want to say the apex of it, because we do everything, but that's kind of the big time event for us, and especially with what I do year round.
I've heard scouts and general managers talk about having a certain type of player, player with an identity or specific characteristics that kind of embody that franchise. As you guys look to rebuild this team a little bit, and someone says, well, that's a Toronto Argonaut. What are you hoping they're talking about? What attributes are those?
That's a great question. I think, over the years, and when you go through this process a lot, you really start to get a feel for not just the guys athletically and the body types, but the kind of guys with the mental makeup, and the type of guys that succeed in this league over time and have long lasting success. And for us, it's kind of been guys that are intrinsically motivated, guys that are self-starters, and guys that love the game, right? Guys that are passionate, they're hungry, they live and breathe football. They kind of can't get enough of it. They're students of the game. They play with an edge, guys that, you can just get a feel just by watching their film that, they love the game, and they're going to give you everything they got. I think, if you got a team of, 46 guys that are all kind of leaving it all out on the field, I think you're going to be in a good spot.
I think you got a lot of those guys in this year's draft. I was surprised at I don't know. I feel like I thought the draft went extremely well. I know you guys loved the draft. I thought it was amazing. I thought it was the best draft in the CFL, and I have a little bias as an Argos fan, but I felt like I was putting that aside. It's a draft class I was very familiar with. It's a lot of guys that I know pretty well, but I thought it was amazing. Why do you think the rest of the national media wasn't as high on it as you or I might have been?
I'm not sure. I can't answer that for them. I just hope, a few years from now, they'll realize that they should have. But no, we were, I know every team, if you go ask every team in the CFL, they'll say they were excited about their draft, but we were. It's not a fabrication. It's, we were excited kind of top to bottom with all the guys we got.
Yeah, no, you're right. Like every team says that anyway, but you could see the genuine excitement just on, you see it on Pinball's face all the time, but, on, Coach Dinwiddie and Murph and, everyone was over the moon with the draft. So, I felt justified in being really pleased with how it went. So in my official mock draft and almost every simulation I ran, I had us taking Dejan Kassar, a Champong, and I had Carter O'Donnell instead of Theron Churchill. Mm-hmm. But the one variable that turned all of my mocks and simulations upside down was if Jordan Williams was not taken first overall. And in those scenarios, I had us taking Williams, and then we usually ended up with Kian Schaefer-Baker and Cam Lawson and Jonathan Zamora, the center. Mm-hmm. Was there? I know there was a plan, but were you ever thinking Jonathan Williams may not go first, and did it matter?
And he's a fantastic football player. I think he's going to be an outstanding pro. We did a lot of our work on Williams. Speaking to guys around the NFL that had gone into ECU and kind of his pro day numbers when he came out, and we did a lot of work on it. And he's going to be a fantastic football player. I think for us, we were really high on Dejan. Even going back to last year, because initially he was in last year's draft class before he got hurt. So even going into his, original senior year, we were very high on him. We'd watched a bunch of his junior film. We had talked to some people. out over there. And then when you watch the first couple games, you thought to yourself, hey, if he continues this path over, 10, 11, 12 games, for a guy that can run like that and be dynamic with the ball at 6'2", 200 pounds, and being able to elevate and have great body control and run a whole bunch of routes. You could see a path of him maybe even getting into an NFL camp, and unfortunately he got injured and missed the rest of that season, and then, it's been documented. He went to Virginia, wasn't completely healthy, didn't really get on the field much until the end of the year. But, we did a lot of work on his time in Virginia. We talked to a lot of people. Last year's draft pick, Joe Spaziani, the long snapper, he's actually a GA over there now at Virginia. So he was giving us a little scoop, kind of peek behind the curtain there as well. And, everybody on that staff raved about him, and just his ability, we thought was just too good to pass up. He's also a great kid too. Great kid.
So, yeah, and that's another thing that, you look at a lot of these guys that have been brought in this year, not exclusively through the draft, but free agent signings. There's a lot of high character guys that are going to be in this locker room. So I think that's something that, I'm really excited to see, how that translates to playing as a team, as a unit.
That was a big point of emphasis for sure.
So I want you to sell me on Theron Churchill, because I obviously missed something in my pre-draft evaluations. I had him with a 5th round grade, and I've warmed up a little bit since and watching some more of his film. But what am I missing? You're a professional scout. I'm not, and he's a lineman, which is your area of expertise. So I know you're right. I just want to know what am I not seeing?
Well, for us, the big thing was his feet, and for a guy, who's pushing 6'6", 285, 290 pounds, he moves his feet extremely well. And he can move laterally. He can get some depth in his kick, but he moves well laterally in the short area. He can mirror guys, stay in front, and he's got a strong punch. He's got some heavy hands, and for a guy who, I know he's a little older, but again, when you kind of see him in person up close, he is lean. He's got room to fill out and get to 305, fill that frame out a little bit, and you get that frame and that length to go with his foot speed. I think he's a guy that, has all the traits, but also, being at Regina, Coach Sheldon out there, he does an excellent job coaching the O-linemen. They're always well coached when they come out of that school. So he's a kid that's technically sound. He's got good football intelligence. So you're not worried about him kind of trying to learn guard and tackle, so he kind of gives you value as a true swing guy right away, and then hope that, he can kind of sit behind Jamal and learn and kind of see where he goes from there. But, typically you don't have a lot of guys that every year that you feel can be, guys that can develop into long-term starting tackles. And we feel like he's got that ability.
I think he's also probably got the ability to move inside if need be. I could see him playing guard as well. But yeah, it's amazing to have a tackle that you can have in place with someone in front of him like Jamal. And actually, you got a few guys that that can sort of show him the ropes as he adds some weight and so forth. I think I feel like I hold age against players in the draft maybe more than I should. And just for any listeners or viewers that aren't sure, I'm not saying like, someone in their mid-20s is over the hill by any means. It's more just that there's no jump. There typically players go through this sort of athletic jump twice in their football career, once usually near the end of high school. And then again, in that first 2 years of university, there's this physical jump. And a guy that's 24, 25 years old has already gone through that. So often what you see is what you get. But you're saying he can still add size. He can still add strength.
Yeah. And at the same time, like his strength level is, we feel it's sufficient. It's just, he's got room to even get, a little bigger. But, even again, he is a little older, but at the same time, I think sometimes people can get a little too carried away with that. If that means he's a, 9-year pro instead of a 12-year pro, we can deal with that.
And you look down south at, like, Joe Burrow is going to be 24 during this season. Does that mean
Right.
you don't draft him, right? So
Right. Yeah. And forego, however long he's a great player. So it's never really, I mean, the only thing with Theron that did come in to factor a little bit is that, he was out of eligibility, so he couldn't go back to school, but we were taking him in the first round, so it wasn't really an issue.
Right. So one of the more fascinating parts of your job, I think, is the week-to-week stuff. How does that work for you as you do some advanced scouting for the next opponent? Like, are you working 1 week ahead of the team or multiple weeks? Like, how does that process go?
Yeah. Second there. So basically, yeah, we'll try to stay 1 week ahead of our future opponent. And typically what we'll try to do is we'll try to have a report for the coaching staff the day after our last game. So as they're going into game planning as a group, we're going to try to have a report on 3 phases of the opposing team, offense, defense, special teams, and try to highlight just some tendency, right? We're not going to try to tell them how to coach. We're not going to tell them what to call, but we're going to tell them kind of what to look for, how we would anticipate them lining up, how we would anticipate them, deploying their ratio. If they had an injury to a Canadian the week before, and it might cause a shuffle throughout their roster, what to look for. Teams have, you see it in the States, teams have different personnel packages that they'll run in and out, but in the CFL, it's a little more complicated because usually those personnel packages have a ratio component to it, right? Where you take out a Canadian receiver to put in a Canadian fullback. It's not just a straight, it has to all match up. So, just making sure the coaching staff is on the same page with that too. And, if you have an injury replacement who is, a true rookie or, a guy that the coaches haven't seen yet, but we'd have seen them in the NFL or watched some of their college film, just giving them a brief scouting report on those guys. And we'll crunch some numbers, try to get tendencies, what teams like to do in certain situations and just kind of put it all out there. And, if they can take anything from it and utilize it then next week, then it's a win.
Do you do self-scouting that way too? Like, would you look at the Argos and say, for example, like, hey, Coach Dinwiddie, we're opening up with this series a lot. Like, maybe we want to look at showing something different, or is that left up to the coaches?
It's more the coaches. We've occasionally done it, more just kind of on our own. And if you want to kind of take it to the coach, just kind of give a heads up. Usually on a bye week, we'll kind of look to do that. Depends on the time of year too, because sometimes, if it's in the fall, we'll be on the road or, in NFL camps or something, but we'll try to do something small.
I know a lot of really great football guys with wonderful X's and O's, great strategy for play calling, etc., who have absolutely no gift for talent evaluation. How was this something that you found out about yourself, that you have this ability to diagnose talent, to, see who's going to turn into something and who's not? Like, where did you notice that, or where did that come from?
I don't know. I guess it's just something I've always kind of naturally done without thinking about it. Right. I mean, as a kid, you're a diehard football fan and you're always kind of watching. And, I was one of those kind of dorks that would watch NFL preseason games to see, hey, look at this guy, hey, this guy might be a player. This guy might be a player. And, it was something that I didn't know at the time, but when you kind of look back, like even when you're playing in high school, right, and you had a teammate and you could say, hey, this guy's going to be good one day, or, what were they thinking bringing in this guy? This guy can't play. It's just kind of, to me, it was always something I was doing without really thinking about it.
You're putting together your own depth charts in your head and stuff like that as well.
It's just, oh yeah, maybe this guy might be our starting, whatever. And, you didn't really think about it at the time. And then when I graduated, I wasn't sure what I wanted to get into specifically. I just knew that I wanted to work in football and make it my profession. And, I wasn't sure if it was going to be scouting or coaching. But being able to get onto a staff at U of T and then again at Mac, and being able to do a bit of everything, the coaching on the field, but also hitting the road, going scouting, going recruiting. To me, that was definitely my favorite part of the job.
You probably do a lot more film work than you do in-person watching of games, just because, a lot of them are played at the same time, especially like U Sports. Do you prefer being there in the stands, or do you prefer having, like an all-24 film to look at?
Definitely in the stands, I would say. Just because, I think that they have to go together. But at the same time, for me, there's certain things you can kind of get being there live. Right? It sounds kind of tacky or cliche, but sometimes you can just feel something by the way a guy moves, or the way a guy acts, or even the way his teammates kind of interact with him. And, you can kind of watch the guy after a play. You can watch him between plays. You can watch him on the sideline. There's, just little things. Even the other day I was watching something. They talked about Mike Mayock. He was on the field at a national championship game, and Josh Jacobs ran past him, and he could feel the burst. And it's you obviously he's fast on film. He's got a burst, but there's something when you're down there and you see it, and, you kind of get a feel for it. I think you can't really replace that.
Yeah. And I love like what you're saying about the sideline stuff too, a quarterback misses a pass, how do they react? Are they getting in the receiver's face in a good way or in a bad way? Are they pouting off the field, ripping their helmet off? Are they sitting on their own? Are they, working with the guys? I think there's a ton of stuff that you can see live, but you don't always have that luxury. Sometimes all you've got is film. And so you've got to then, I guess do a lot of background checks and check in with all the coaches and so forth. You spend a lot of time, talking to U Sports coaches? Yeah,
a lot. So, normally we'll visit every school anyway at some point throughout the year, whether it's a practice or game. Practices are good because you can go, you can speak to the coaching staff, you can, observe practice. And a lot of those little things, like we mentioned, you can see in practice because, there's less reps going on. You can kind of just observe and, speak to everybody around the program and try to get a feel for the player off the field. And then it helps because like you said, you're not going to be able to watch every game live. It's just, logistically it's impossible. But if, you see him practice, you see him up close, you see him move around, and you have the background work, you get back to your desk, you watch the film, and it helps you complete the picture. Are you able to watch a football game and just sort of enjoy it as a football game anymore? Or have those days gone where you as soon as that game's on, you're in full scouting mode? They're gone. And like, coaching a couple of years too, like I am interested in, some of the schemes and the trends and, what's certain, like, the Ravens and how they've kind of brought back the triple option, in modern football. And, I enjoy that as well, but, you're always kind of, when your brain just becomes wired after, doing this day in, day out for all these years. I tried early in my coaching career. I got my official certification so that I could be a referee because I thought that would be, I didn't really want to ref games. I just wanted to know the rules a little bit better so that I could actually cite things to referees when they gave me a hard time. But I actually had to do a few games as a part of that process. And I was the worst referee ever because I got caught up watching positional battles, instead of, watching for holding or offsides. I'm watching this, receiver DB battle going on. And, you just want to let them play, right? You don't want to throw a flag. Yeah. Well, I realized I could only watch the game as a coach. That's sort of when I realized that, I can't really be a proper fan anymore, but I guess I'm okay with that. And it is different watching film. Even, from that perspective, watching film from a coaching perspective versus a talent evaluating process, it is different. Do you have a team that you cheer for in the NFL? Not anymore, but growing up, I was a big 49er fan.
I was a Cincinnati Bengals fan growing up, so he never said the words 49ers around me with 2 Super Bowl losses. And man, Joe Montana was not a popular man in my house. So I'm glad you're not a 49ers fan anymore. But yeah, I want to thank you again so much for joining us today. It's been great. Hopefully we've got some football for you to watch soon, and everyone can get back to it. But in the meantime, stay well, stay safe. And again, thanks so much for joining us on the show today.
I appreciate it. Anytime.
Vince Magri, Toronto Argonauts, Director of Canadian Scouting. That was pretty awesome. That was a lot of fun to do as an interview.
Yeah, I thought it was great to hear somebody from the organization really give honest and sincere answers, and it wasn't a lot of doublespeak or, a lot of words meaning nothing. I thought he really shared some great insights into the Argos.
And I think it's interesting to hear, like when I asked him about the draft and challenged him on a couple of things there, I was sort of expecting a more political answer. Like when I asked him, what if Jordan Williams wasn't taken first overall? Do you take the linebacker there? And, I expected, I guess, maybe a bit more political answer, but he's just like basically no. We love him, but no, and here's why. And I think that's amazing. I think that's really cool because you don't typically get that.
I was really glad that didn't come up because I would have had a big problem with that.
If they passed on Jordan Williams?
Yeah, I think you got to go BPA every time. That's my 2 cents.
Yeah, although when I looked at sort of I haven't looked back at our mocks in so long, but I was looking back at like the players that, because if you take Williams, then the players you end up with are very different. And I actually like the first 4 rounds that we got better than the first 4 rounds I would end up with if you take a linebacker first. Because it means you're not getting Kassar, obviously. You're not going to take another linebacker later. And then suddenly the receiver that you need to get, who's no longer Brissett, that's probably going to be someone like Kean Schaefer-Baker and, who I like a lot. And then, Cam Lawson as probably the defensive lineman instead of a Champong. But, you look at the 4 players that we ended up with, I'm not sure you can get a combination of 4 players that are any better than that in the draft. And while I love Jordan Williams and was really excited about the potential to get him, I'm not sure the draft works out as well if we do end up taking him. Not because of him, but because of positionally what you'll end up with.
No, I we talked about it. I was really excited about the draft, so I was glad to have him on because, I think they did a heck of a job.
And you can see the genuine excitement and hear it in his voice. Like he loved this draft and this group of players we've got. And so I felt sort of justified in also being in love with the draft. And when this guy who knows a lot more than I do about the kids they drafted was even happier than I was. So I thought that was pretty cool. Well, that's just about going to do it for us today. As always, I would remind you to please subscribe, rate, and tell everyone you know about us, especially Argos fans. Until next time, for JB, I'm Ben Grant saying so long, and may all your pre-snap reads be good ones. I'll see ya.